I was wrestling a dying, 8-foot-tall vinyl giant named Blinky when she arrived. December in suburban Massachusetts, and my breath was frosting the air as I sweated, fighting with a cheap air compressor hose that kept slipping out of Blinky's inflatable foot valve. It was the third time that week. See, Blinky wasn't just an inflatable Santa. He was the inflatable Santa. He was impossibly wide, wore a permanent, slightly insane wink, and had a polyester sheen that reflected every street lamp like a cheap carnival prize. He was peak holiday tackiness, and I loved him. He was the only thing standing between my house and the creeping beige homogeneity of the Sycamore Heights Homeowners Association. "Come on, you glorious winking bastard, inflate," I muttered, my head practically inside Santa's red vinyl knee, trying to get enough air pressure to lift the sack he carried, a sack that always looked suspiciously like a giant, bulging beanbag chair. That's when I heard the tisk, a sound that could only be produced by an HOA vice president approaching at a controlled velocity. I straightened up, pulling my neck out of Blinky's knee crease, and saw Brenda. Brenda, the reigning queen of beige, the woman who believed joy was best experienced in muted earth tones. She was wearing a cream-colored puffer jacket that looked like it cost more than my car insurance, and carrying a manila envelope so thick it might have contained the blueprints for the Death Star. "Max," she said, her voice a precise, sharp blade, cutting through the whir of the struggling compressor. "I see you're still having issues with the structural integrity of your adornment." "Brenda, always a pleasure," I replied, wiping my sweaty brow with the back of my glove. "Just a minor technical glitch. Blinky had a rough night. He's structurally sound, just needs a little holiday spirit injection." "Holiday spirit," she repeated, making the two words sound vaguely obscene. She didn't even shiver, despite the 40-degree temperature. She was either a robot or had a deep, personal relationship with merino wool. She held out the manila envelope. "This is certified. You need to sign." I took the pen, signed the little green card, and accepted my fate. The envelope smelled faintly of expensive laundry detergent and the pure, unadulterated essence of petty bureaucracy. "What is it this time, Brenda? Did my icicle lights exceed the wattage guidelines? Am I officially banned from owning a driveway that isn't charcoal gray?" She watched me as I tore open the envelope. "It is a formal cease and desist, Max. Effective immediately. Blinky must be completely deflated and stored out of sight within 24 hours. My eyes scanned the single, dense paragraph, delivered straight from the HOA Board of Directors. It cited Covenant Article 4.b, Exterior Holiday Adornments. Brenda decided to offer commentary, because of course she did. "The board has ruled that your particular inflatable, Santa, is a violation on 3 separate counts, Max. 1. Non-permanent. 2. Commercially branded, due to the visible licensing tag on the reindeer's harness. And 3, she paused, savoring the kill shot, aesthetically offensive. My blood pressure spiked, a dangerous festive red. "Aesthetically offensive?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Brenda, the entire point of Christmas decorations is aesthetic offense. That's what brings people together. Look at this street. It's a monochromatic funeral. Blinky is a beacon of light and polyester-based freedom." "It lowers property values, Max," she stated, as if stating a fundamental law of physics. "It clashes with the colonial revival architecture of this community. And frankly, that winking expression suggests something rather untoward." I stared at her, then down at Blinky. The compressor finally gave up the ghost with a sad hiss, and Blinky, unable to fight gravity any longer, slumped completely. His giant, smiling face crumpled against the concrete, his winking eye now looking like a pathetic, accusing squint. He was a nylon corpse, killed by passive-aggressive paperwork. A deep, personal insult. That's what this was. Brenda didn't just hate my decoration. She hated my choice. She hated the fact that I enjoyed something she deemed beneath the Sycamore Heights standards. I looked back at Brenda, her face frozen in a look of smug, victorious neutrality. "You know what, Brenda? You're right. I'm taking him down." She almost smiled, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Thank you, Max. We appreciate your cooperation." "Oh, it's not cooperation," I said, peeling off my wet glove. "It's redirection. You banned non-permanent and aesthetically offensive inflatables." "Fine. I will not fight your rule directly." I stood there, Blinky a puddle of nylon defeat behind me. I looked at the pristine, untouched front of Brenda's house, which featured a single, tasteful, unlit wreath. "You said non-permanent," I continued, feeling a manic energy bubbling up. "You said commercially branded. You said aesthetically offensive. But you left one thing completely unprotected, Brenda. You never banned art. You never regulated permanent structures. And you certainly never defined tacky in a court of law." Brenda's forehead wrinkled slightly. A dangerous sign. She was processing this, and she didn't like the implication. "Max, don't be ridiculous. Any replacement must still adhere to Article 4.b's mandate for overall visual cohesion." I took a deliberate step closer. Visual cohesion is dead, Brenda. You murdered it when you sent that certified letter. And where Blinky once stood, I will commission a permanent, non-commercial, aesthetically subjective artistic installation. I will create something so legally compliant, yet so monumentally offensive, that it will haunt your beige-colored dreams every single night until the 4th of July. I picked up the deflated mass of Blinky, tucked him under my arm like a casualty of war, and walked inside. I heard Brenda call out something about a fine, but I was already slamming the door. The vow was made. Blinky's sacrifice would not be in vain. The war against the beige had officially begun. I immediately went to the utility closet and located the thick binder containing the full, excruciatingly detailed Sycamore Heights Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. It was time for a legal rampage fueled entirely by spite and a crippling lack of holiday cheer. 2 days. That's how long it took me to read the entire HOA covenant, highlight the relevant sections, cross-reference the appendices, and emerge from my living room smelling vaguely of paper dust and victory. My diet consisted primarily of stale coffee and the pure, concentrated adrenaline of petty vengeance. I found it. Article 6.a, Permanent Structural Additions. It allowed for artistic structures or flag poles up to 22 feet tall, provided they adhered to the 12-foot setback from the front property line and included an appropriate foundation. No mention of material, color, or thematic content. The loophole wasn't just a loophole, it was a 20-foot tall, scrap metal welded, neon-eyed tunnel of opportunity. The plan: commission a 20-foot tall Santa Claus, welded entirely out of reclaimed industrial scrap metal, positioned precisely at the legal setback limit. I would name it Irony Clause later, but for now it was simply the project. My neighbor, Sarah, a single mom with the patience of a saint and a magnificent sense of deadpan humor, found me marking the dimensions with chalk on my front lawn. "Max," she said, leaning over the fence, her arms crossed, "you look like you're trying to draw a chalk outline for a giant metallic homicide victim. What are the dimensions on this crime scene?" 20 feet high, Sarah. 12 feet from the street. It's the minimum required setback for a permanent artistic structure, I announced proudly, running a tape measure along the pavement. The HOA allows for it. They just didn't expect anyone to actually build something 20 feet tall that wasn't a weather vane or a very sad cedar. She sighed, a sound that conveyed volumes of suburban resignation. You are literally preparing to put a property lien on your house because Brenda hated your inflatable. I love this for you, but are you sure? Sarah, Blinky was killed. This is his memorial. This is performance art. This is me fighting the good fight against people who think beige is a personality trait. They banned non-permanent, so I'm giving them permanence. Forever. She grinned, pulling out her phone. Okay. Well, when you start the crane, I'm calling the local news. You're going to need a good fabricator. Not Bob from down the street who fixes fences, but someone who understands the glorious physics of spite. That's where the real chaos started. I spent the next 2 days calling welders, fabricators, and metal artists trying to explain the commission. Contractor 1. The Skeptic, Precision Metals, Inc. Yes, sir, we specialize in high-tolerance structural work. Stainless steel, aluminum, precision welding. What are the load-bearing requirements for this 20-foot structure? The man, who sounded like he wore a hard hat to bed, asked over the phone. It needs to bear the load of approximately 3 metric tons of pure aesthetic offense, I deadpanned. And it needs to be made of junk. There was a long silence. Sir, when you say junk, are we talking about reclaimed material or specifically garbage? A mixture. Rusty car parts, old lawnmower blades, rebar, maybe a few repurposed chrome bumpers for Santa's boots. I want it to look like Santa ran a monster truck rally and then fused with a junkyard. It needs to be structurally sound enough not to flatten my neighbor's Volvo, but artistically, it needs to scream, "Why, God, why?" The man cleared his throat. I see. Well, Max, our initial quote for a 20-foot structural integrity assessment alone, before we ethically source any, and I quote, junk, is $22,000. We have to account for fatigue life on non-standard materials. He was clearly trying to scare me off. So, $22,000 to start documenting the potential collapse of my spite statue? Hard pass? I need Tacky, not NASA grade. Thanks anyway. I hung up, realizing this was going to be harder than I thought. The price of quality spite was high. Contractor 2, the hippie artist, Zen Forge Collective. I found a listing for an experiential metal sculptor named Luna. I had high hopes. Namaste, Max, Luna greeted me, her voice sounding airy and scented with patchouli. Tell me about your vision for the collective unconscious, channeled through the medium of metal. It's a 20-foot Santa, made of trash. That winks. And by trash, I mean old engine blocks and maybe a broken swing set. A beautiful concept. The juxtaposition of consumerism and decay, she enthused. But Santa is a symbol of giving. I feel the medium demands a message of peace and reconciliation. Instead of a sack, he could hold a giant, welded dove of peace, representing the end of the suburban struggle. I nearly dropped my coffee. Luna, with all due respect, I am not trying to end the suburban struggle. I am trying to annihilate one specific woman's enjoyment of the suburban struggle. The sack has to be there. It needs to be gigantic. And it needs to look like it contains the welded remains of every toy the HOA ever banned. But a dove? No dove, Luna. Spite. Pure, unadulterated, glorious spite. It's a statue built solely to annoy Brenda. If it brings peace, I've failed. Perhaps you are not ready to truly channel your artistic fury, Max, she said sadly. Perhaps your artistic fury is too zen for this job, Luna. I need rage. Click. The winner. Big Rick's Industrial Salvage and Artistic Welding. I was about to give up when I stumbled across a listing on Craigslist. Structural welding. We fix, we fabricate, we don't ask questions. Call Rick. Big Rick answered on the second ring. He sounded like he swallowed gravel for breakfast. Rick, I need a 20-foot statue of Santa Claus, welded from scrap metal. It has to be ugly, permanent, and look like it crawled out of a landfill. 20 feet, huh? That's tall. You got permits for that kind of height? I have the HOA covenant on my side. I need it to be aesthetically offensive, but structurally sound. It needs red LED lights for the eyes, and it needs to be cemented in place. Rick let out a booming laugh that rattled my eardrum. Ha! You're my kind of customer, kid. I've been waiting for a job like this since I welded a giant spider out of tractor parts for that guy whose wife left him. You want it tacky or really tacky? Rick, I said, leaning back in my chair, suddenly feeling warm and Christmassy again. I want Brenda, the HOA VP, to wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat thinking that scrap metal Santa is looking at her. I want pure tackiness. Say no more. I got 2 rusted I-beams that'll make great legs. Got a whole pile of old chrome plating that'll look real nice as the beard. Head's gonna be tough. We use a repurposed satellite dish for the belly. I can do it. Price will be a flat 12 grand plus materials cost, which is mostly my time scavenging. You supply the foundation hole. 12 grand. The price of sweet, sweet victory. Deal, Rick. I'm sending you the dimensions, the HOA covenant section, and a picture of the inflatable Santa that died for this cause. Consider this his metallic reincarnation. We finalized the design. A massive, rusted, slightly hunched Santa. The hat would be a flattened, oxidized oil drum. The sack would be a sealed steel drum, too heavy to ever move. And yes, the eyes would be glowing, demonic red LEDs. My kindred spirit, Rick, had been found. Rick was not a man of small gestures. His company name, Big Rick's Industrial Salvage and Artistic Welding, was apparently shorthand for, "We show up with gear that could build a bridge." The early construction phase, which Rick dubbed the scrap staging, was precisely designed to infuriate the neighborhood. Rick, bless his heart, didn't want to transport a finished 20-foot structure, so he used my driveway as a temporary assembly point for the smaller components. First, the deliveries. Massive flatbed trucks, the kind that usually haul logs or construction equipment, started showing up on my perfectly manicured street. The first drop was a heap of ancient transmission parts and bicycle frames, the raw materials for Santa's hands and feet. The second was 2 colossal rusted I-beams, the aforementioned legs, which they laid end to end on my front lawn, crushing the zoysia grass beneath them. It looked less like an artistic endeavor and more like a poorly executed train derailment. I was outside, surveying my newly established, unauthorized refuse heap, when Carol, the neighborhood's official busybody, and Brenda's chief lieutenant approached. Carol had a dog named Winston, a fluffy Maltipoo, who was currently straining at his leash to pee on one of the I-beams. "Max, what in God's name is that?" Carol asked, her voice pitched somewhere between concern and hysteria. "Morning, Carol. That's the first shipment of materials for my new artistic structure. It's permanent, non-commercial, and aesthetically subjective," I replied cheerfully, using all my new favorite legal terms. "It looks like a pile of tetanus," she whispered, pulling Winston away from a particularly rusty axle. "Are you going to be recycling all of this? Is this some kind of community initiative?" "Recycling? Carol, no. This is going to be a 20-foot-tall Santa Claus." She stared, mouth agape. "A fountain? It's going to be a metal fountain?" "Close, Carol. It's a monument to the death of joy. But I guess if it rained hard enough, it would technically be a fountain. Yes. Write that down. Artistic irony fountain. Carol quickly snapped 3 photos of the pile of scrap with her phone and marched back toward Brenda's house, clearly preparing the next round of paperwork. Within the hour, the HOA had retaliated. A new certified letter was slipped under my door, a formal cessation of work and abatement notice for violating Article 4.c. Prohibition of unauthorized refuse, heaps, and public nuisances. I immediately called Rick. Rick, the HOA is calling your meticulously curated pile of materials a refuse heap. I need a rebuttal. Legally compliant, but highly antagonistic. Rick just cackled. Got it, boss. Let me put a stamp on this one. 10 minutes later, I received a text message containing a photo. It was a close-up of a partially welded, 8-foot-tall metal Santa boot, currently sitting in Rick's workshop. Across the picture, Rick had taken a giant red paint marker and scrawled, "Artistic materials. Property of artist. Work in progress. Don't touch my junk." I forwarded the photo to the HOA manager with the subject line, "Abatement notice. See attached art." The next escalation came when Rick delivered the finished head. It was truly terrifying. Welded from a series of old chrome car bumpers for the beard, a battered utility helmet for the dome, and featuring 2 massive red glass lenses for the eyes. It looked like the helmet worn by a Viking Santa from the Mad Max universe. Rick dropped it off on a reinforced wooden pallet right next to my curb. It weighed close to 800 pounds, and even on the ground, commanded attention. And that finally was enough to bring the law. I was inside, debating whether to start polishing the rust. Rick said absolutely not, when I saw the flashing blue and red of a police cruiser outside. My heart sank. This wasn't just HOA petty drama anymore. This was my actual freedom at stake. I walked out to meet Officer Miller. He was a young guy, looked tired, and had the air of someone who thought his job would involve car chases, not Christmas decorations. He stepped out of his car, adjusting his utility belt. "Max?" he asked, pointing a pen at me. "That's me, officer. Max. And before you ask, no, I haven't seen any suspicious persons or activities, unless you count the aggressive pruning of rose bushes at 6 a.m. He sighed. "We received 3 separate calls in the last hour. Illegal dumping, disturbing the peace, and possible biohazard incident due to unusual metal formations." He gestured with his pen toward the scrap pile and the terrifying head. "Can you tell me what all this stuff is?" "Certainly, Officer Miller. This is a work of artistic structural addition commissioned by me, Max, to comply with the Sycamore Heights HOA covenants." He blinked. "The HOA is involved? Seriously?" "Oh, deeply, officer. They banned my inflatable Santa, Blinky, rest his polyester soul, on the grounds of aesthetic offense. So I am replacing him with a permanent metal sculpture that is legally compliant in size and setback, as per Article 6A of the CCRs." I walked to my front door and pulled out the thick binder, along with Rick's structural assessment report, the one with the crayon drawings. "The structural assessment, officer, is right here," I said, handing him the folder. "And here, I've highlighted the specific section of the covenant that allows this 20-foot structure, which is within the 22-foot maximum height for artistic installations. Note the date of the covenant ratification, 1987. They clearly never envisioned spite-based industrial metal art." Officer Miller slowly opened the folder, his eyes scanning the crayon-annotated diagram of Santa's basic form. He looked back at the scrap pile, then at the head, the grotesque, staring, chrome-plated Santa head, then back at the folder. "Sir, you're telling me you've got the paperwork to build. A giant, rusty Santa? I'm telling you, officer, that I have a legally sound, structurally evaluated, violating piece of art in progress. The complaint, as far as I can tell, is simply that certain neighbors find it grotesque. But that is subjective, and according to the HOA rules, Max has the right to defend his subjective aesthetic choices. I pointed to the relevant section. See? Disputes regarding aesthetic merit shall be submitted to mediation, not police intervention. I know my CCRs, officer. Do you know your CCRs? Officer Miller closed the folder, slowly. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, the sheer absurdity of the situation clearly weighing on him. Max, he said, the voice of a man defeated by paperwork and holiday spite. I'm not here to mediate HOA disputes. I'm here because people reported illegal dumping and fear for their safety. He's pointed at the Santa head. That thing looks like it's about to consume a small child. That's just the structural style, officer. It's called post-apocalyptic festive. It's a comment on late-stage capitalism and forced holiday cheer, I explained, trying not to laugh. He took a deep breath. Look, as far as the city is concerned, you have the necessary permits for a permanent structure, and this isn't blocking traffic or actively on fire. I can't fine you for ugly. He handed the folder back. But as a friendly piece of advice from the police department, if you could perhaps keep the welding noise down when the crew is here, that would save me from having to drive past this thing again. Understood, officer. Maximum compliance on noise levels. Thank you for protecting my constitutional right to permanent, terrifying holiday art. Officer Miller got back in his cruiser, shaking his head. As he slowly drove away, I looked at the Santa head, now bathed in the glow of the flashing blue lights. Victory in Section 3 was mine. The law, as an entity, was annoyed but powerless. The final day of installation was a spectacle of American suburban dysfunction that would have made a documentary filmmaker weep with joy. Rick arrived at 7:00 a.m. sharp with a crew of 4, a flatbed hauling the enormous 12-foot-wide torso and sack structure, and the star of the show, a mobile crane that looked far too large for a residential street. The entire setup was a beautiful industrial nightmare. The crew, true to form, were all wearing cheap, slightly greasy red Santa hats. "All right, Max, time to cement this sucker in place," Rick bellowed, stepping out of his truck. He smelled of diesel, metal dust, and pure concentrated testosterone. The neighborhood, of course, was already awake. Brenda's blinds were half drawn, revealing her silhouette hovering like a vigilant gargoyle. Carol was across the street, pretending to hose down a patch of sidewalk that hadn't seen dirt in a decade, all while filming with her phone. Sarah, my rock and camera woman, was leaning against her mailbox. "You've got a crowd, Max. The tension is palpable. It's like a beige bullfight." "Good. They need to witness the birth of Irony Claws," I said, watching the crane operator hook the massive torso section. The lift was slow, dramatic, and nerve-wracking. The rusty metal groaned under the tension as the crane hoisted the 20-foot body of Santa into the sky. It was massive. It dwarfed my 2-story house. The sun hit the oxidized red and green panels, making it look like a terrifying, abstract deity. "The head! Get the head on!" I yelled. Rick signaled the crane. The awful, chrome-plated, bumper-bearded head was raised. The welder, a quiet guy named Doug, climbed the scaffolding like a spider and, with a shower of brilliant sparks, fused Santa's head permanently to his rusty shoulders. When the crane finally released its load, The 20-foot scrap metal Santa, Irony, Klaus, stood alone, cemented deep into the ground. He was lopsided, monstrous, and perfect. The final touch. I flipped the circuit breaker for the eyes. Vroom! The twin red LED eyes flared to life, casting an angry, demonic crimson glow over my front yard. Irony. Claus was staring, malevolently, right at Brenda's front window. The silence lasted about 3 seconds before the shrieking started. Brenda, fueled by pure horror, burst out of her house, not even bothering to adjust her expensive cardigan. Trailing behind her was Mr. Henderson, the HOA president, a small man who generally outsourced his personality to his khakis. They rushed across the lawn, Brenda clutching a file folder like a shield. "Max, this is monstrous. It is a travesty. It is a hazard," Brenda shrieked, pointing at the towering metal menace. "Good morning, Brenda, Mr. Henderson," I greeted them, giving a respectful nod to the sculpture. "May I introduce Irony Claus? Isn't he magnificent? Permanent, demercipient, non-commercial, and aesthetically defensible." "Aesthetically defensible? It looks like a Soviet missile built by a robot who hates Christmas," Mr. Henderson squeaked, clutching his clipboard. "It is a striking piece of industrial modern sculpture," I insisted. "It comments on the ephemeral nature of holiday joy by giving the symbol of Christmas permanent, tangible weight. It's an investment. Check the covenant, Article 6 HOA. 2 stories high, 12 feet from the setback. We are compliant." Brenda slammed her folder on a metal foot. "The code explicitly states structures must be no more than 22 feet. This exceeds the spirit of the rule. It is not a flagpole. It is grotesque." Grotesque," I said, pulling out a copy of my paperwork, highlighted in canary yellow. "That word is not defined in the covenant, Brenda. It's subjective. And speaking of aesthetics, under Article 4.b, disputes regarding aesthetic merit must be reviewed by the appointed Community Artistic Review Committee. I've sent 3 emails asking who the appointed critic is. Can you finally tell me who has the authority to declare my art grotesque?" Brenda sputtered, her composure finally shattered. "There is no committee, Max. We usually just vote on taste." "Then by what legal metric are you judging Irony Claus? If there is no official art critic, then my aesthetic judgment is as valid as yours. And my judgment is that Irony Claus is breathtaking." I paused, then added, "Also, Rick's receipt calls the structure." And I quote, "Santa Claus, patron saint of permanent irony." As Brenda was searching for a coherent argument, the noise arrived. It was the sound of a dozen phone notifications simultaneously going off. Then, the distinct, unwelcome roar of a news van pulling up, followed by a second. Sarah, my wonderful, technologically savvy neighbor, stepped forward, phone in hand. "Max, you're trending. HOA man builds metal Godzilla Santa." The video of the crane lift is on the local TSO news ticker. They're running B-roll of Blinky the Inflatable next to Irony Claus right now. The sight of the news crews and the realization that their petty tyranny had become a viral spectacle finally broke the HOA pair. Mr. Henderson looked faint, and Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits of pure, impotent rage. The ultimate defeat wasn't delivered by me, but by their own overzealous lawyer, who was suddenly on the phone with Brenda. "He's got a court order, an emergency injunction against the installation," Brenda yelled into her phone, desperation clinging to her voice. I just smiled and sipped my coffee. Brenda listened for a moment, her face draining of color. She hung up, staring at the towering metal Santa, its red eyes seeming to mock her. "What is it, Brenda?" Mr. Henderson asked nervously. He says we have no legal standing," she whispered, defeat heavy on her tongue. The lawyer says since the structure is permanent, cemented, structurally assessed, and within the height and setback requirements of Article 6.A, we can't force removal on aesthetic grounds alone. He followed the letter of the law. We banned the wrong thing. We banned the inflatable, Mr. Henderson. The temporary, flimsy thing, I chimed in, enjoying every syllable. You should have banned the permanent, immovable scrap metal version. A rookie mistake, frankly. Brenda crumpled her paperwork. She had lost the war of aesthetics. The HOA's entire case had collapsed because they failed to regulate permanent art, only temporary fun. I had won. The 20-foot-tall, terrifying monument to bureaucratic defeat stood proudly on my lawn. Irony Claus was a phenomenon. Within a week, my suburban street, usually silent enough to hear a pin drop in a snowdrift, became a tourist attraction. People drove in from 3 towns over, slowly cruising past my house, taking selfies with the majestic, terrifying sculpture. Kids were either terrified or absolutely delighted. I was interviewed by the local news anchor, standing right next to the statue, dwarfed by its rusty glory. Anchor: So Max, the HOA banned your 8-foot inflatable, and you retaliated with a 20-foot permanent metal structure. Why this level of commitment? Max, on camera, deadpan. Well, when you live in a community where joy is regulated down to the wattage of your light bulbs, you have to send a message. My old Santa Blinky was just asking for a little cheer. They responded with a certified letter. I responded with a several-ton monument to their failure to regulate the artistic structures section of their own bylaws. It's an exercise in constitutional irony, really. Anchor: And the HOA claims it's grotesque. Max: They do. But look at him. I gestured to the glowing red eyes. He's terrifying, yes, but he's also structurally sound. I followed every single rule. I recommend that the HOA invest less in certified mail and more in a qualified art critic. Until then, Irony Claus stays. The clip went national. I was briefly known as the scrap metal Santa guy. My sarcasm, delivered directly to the camera, painted Brenda and her crew as the Grinch's deeply boring cousins. The HOA held an emergency, closed-door meeting to address the Max problem and the viral humiliation problem. They tried to pass an immediate amendment to the covenants. I got the update from Sarah, who had a spy on the board, a kindly, older gentleman named Mr. Peterson, who just wanted to grow zucchini in peace. It was a bloodbath, Max, Sarah said, watching a car full of teenagers take a picture of Irony Claus. Brenda proposed a new amendment banning all metal art over 5 feet and declaring all permanent holiday figures non-compliant with the colonial aesthetic. And Mr. Peterson, God bless his zucchini-loving heart, rallied the troops. People are tired of the pettiness. They love the drama. They voted the amendment down. They're actually laughing at Brenda now. You've officially broken the spirit of HOA tyranny. Brenda was officially neutralized. She couldn't look at me, or Irony Claus, without her face twitching. Mr. Henderson was last seen volunteering for trash pickup duty 3 towns over, just to escape the public shame. For my final, quiet act of victory, my personal epilogue for Brenda, I waited until 4 a.m. I poured a small concrete pad on the very corner of her lawn, precisely 6 inches from her property line, and cemented a tiny 6-inch-tall, welded steel Santa figure onto it. No eyes, no color, just a perfectly legal, permanently affixed miniature metal Santa. In the morning, she saw it. She stared at it for 5 full minutes, realizing that removing it would require a jackhammer, a permit, and another certified letter. She left it there. It was beautiful. Irony claws became a fixture. People wrote me fan mail. Someone mailed me a set of chrome reindeer antlers they wanted me to add. I politely declined. The integrity of the piece had to be maintained. I stood on my driveway one evening, looking up at the towering figure. He was so ugly, so aggressively permanent, and yet somehow majestic. He was a constant, metallic reminder to the entire neighborhood that I was willing to commit structural vandalism in the name of kitsch. "You know, Rick," I said, calling him up, "I think I might keep him up all year." "Good. Saves me the trouble of moving him. But you owe me 12 grand, kid." "Sent yesterday. And Rick, I have a new idea. Spring is coming up." "Oh no, don't tell me." "They don't regulate permanent structures of mythological creatures in the springtime either, do they? I was thinking, 30-foot scrap metal Easter bunny. It needs to be holding a giant rusted egg." Rick paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Max, you're an artist. I'll start sourcing the steel rabbit ears tomorrow." I hung up, looking at the towering, terrifying, yet magnificent irony claws. He was my burden, my champion, and my eternal monument to the death of common sense. All they wanted was a little less tacky. They got exactly what they deserved. The suburbs would never be beige again.